Hello.
Hello. You're still here. That's
Yeah.
nice. Thank you.
Thanks, Katharina, for this film and for being here. I'll start off with a few questions, and then we can hear from the audience. But I guess maybe I'll start like logically. I'm just curious, like where this film started for you, or I guess, and just in general, where how you embark on a project. And generally, do you think thematically, visually, or are you pulling from something else entirely?
I mean, the genesis of this story is very long. So during many years, I had different ideas of images, scenes, thoughts. Sometimes even a piece of music or a person that I would like to work with. And then it adds up, and at some point it feels like, okay, there is so much now, and I need to put it all together, and then you just sit down and try to write it down. But the very initial one was also just a feeling and an observation of everyday things where I feel like we're in a group of people and we all agree that something's off, something's not quite right, or something is not good for us as a group, or but somehow nobody does anything, and we just continue. And yeah, I was also, so it came from a very little things, daily life, and then of course you can expand it. It's maybe what we do as people, I don't know, sometimes we wait until there's, well, we hit the wall, and maybe then we decide to actually improve things or change.
So you alluded that this was like a long gestating project. When did it start?
It started like more than 10 years ago. It's not like I was constantly thinking about it, but the first characters, there was in the beginning only Margarita existed, and it was supposed to be an animation film actually. But then it grew and grew and grew, and I knew, okay, I cannot draw it by myself, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to bring up the fact that you worked primarily as an animator prior to this, and I'm curious if you can talk about how that transition sort of happened for you, and actually if you found yourself like drawing from your experiences, your skills as an animator, and applying it to this film in ways you maybe weren't expecting.
Yeah. Well, it was sort of organic. So since the first idea, obviously I did some other projects, and I also shot an essay film, which was also with real people and not animated, made some short films. But while doing my last short film, which I enjoyed and it was all great, but at some point sitting alone in a room for days and weeks and months, I felt like it can't be it. I mean, I need to experience more in my life than being just alone in a room. And when you work with people, surprising things can happen. So I was ready for the full thing with the advantages and disadvantages of working with people. And I mean, I know probably here are also filmmakers in the audience, and you know, when you shoot a film, the craziest things happen sometimes that you don't experience in your life. And I feel like sometimes a film shoot, it's a compressed, dense experience of life, because you have these problems or conflict situations that you need to solve, and it challenges you in a different way than.
But I mean, and just maybe jumping to shooting like that. I mean, the film does give like a very like evident like sense of composure. But were there moments of spontaneity while you were shooting that you had to deal with?
For sure. I mean, it was scripted. There was a text, and the actors, I'm always amazed. They learn the text. They know it. I mean, for me, it's still fascinating because I had to check my dialogue that I wrote, and they knew it. So, but we did not rehearse. We did not prepare anything in advance. We did not any blocking of the scenes. So in that sense, it was somewhat spontaneous. So they were allowed to move in the space. Still, it's quite static, and they remain mostly in one spot. They don't walk around too much, but still we wanted them to feel free, so we let the camera roll and adapt to what they were doing. So, and this sense of maybe spontaneity or something comes from there, because we just went to the set and tried out.
Well, I guess, so then to go back, you mentioned you have a script. Does it did this film have like a fairly like traditional script? Because I mean, watching this film, it is so clearly like you have developed a very lived-in world, but also information about this world and when it is, where it is what is happening outside of this village is sort of delivered to us piecemeal. It does almost generate a feeling like you deliberately wrote more and then subtracted, and so I'm curious what the script was like, and I guess how that information was even just communicated to your actors, and what info they had that maybe we didn't have.
Well, obviously, I mean, it happens, I think, to many filmmakers who work in a similar way, that we actually write more and also more dialogue. And then, yeah, the subtraction happens in the editing, that we realize, okay, it's not necessary to tell something, but it was necessary to write it. And I think it was necessary for the actors and the whole team to know. The script itself, well, there was maybe a bit more information to get exactly to understand exactly what is going on, a little bit more precise, but it was still not written out completely. So it was some sort of a conventional script, but at the same time still very poetic in a way. So I have sometimes passages where I don't write out the dialogue, but just explain the situation, and then I come up with the dialogue later, or the other way around. I decided, let's just cut the dialogue and we don't do any of it. And then also during the shooting, on the weekends, I had the camera for myself, because the team needs weekends. But I didn't want to stop shooting, because I thought we arrange everything, so let's just work. So I worked with volunteers on the weekends, and mainly these are the actors, they want to act all the time. So there also we had more chances to do these improvised, spontaneous things. So for example, I would go them to a different location and do the same dialogue that we actually shot within the story and the narrative, but we would change it up. And because they were already in their state of being as, for example, Güte and Margarita, it was easy for them to just adapt to the new location and just improvise. And there are quite a few moments of this.
How did you go about casting? How did you find Güte and Margarita?
With Güte, it was really stressful, because it was supposed to be a different actress. And I think 2 or 3 weeks before the shooting, she said she can't do it, because she had a different project where she already had signed something in whatever, it's not so interesting, but she couldn't do it, so I was panicking. So I started doing what I actually never wanted to do. I don't know about here, but we have like these sort of catalogs online of actors, these platforms where they have their profiles. I was just scrolling through like crazy, like, okay, somebody. And then, of course, first of all, it's a bit superficial. I was trying to look for a specific type, and then I check out the show reel, and somehow, yeah, I came across Clara, and she actually just finished her acting school, and I think she had her last event at the school, and the next day she came to our set. So it was the very first film of that kind of size that she ever did. And with Margarita, it was earlier. I found her because I was asking friends, do you know somebody who knows somebody who might fit? Because I did not want to go through the normal casting procedure. I was first of all, in the beginning, I wanted to just have my friends there, and in the side roles, these are just friends that I just asked to do it, and it was fun. But with the main actors, it was very like individually picked. And I usually just go for a coffee with them and we chat. And if I realize, okay, we are speaking some sort of a similar language, they understand what I'm saying. And also as persons, like in real life, there is something happening inside of them. I feel like they are interesting as people. Then I invited them to have a little reading. And then.
So, where were you shooting?
It's in the region of North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. It's 1 hour south from Cologne. I don't know if anybody knows this place, but it's a little rural, hilly area.
Was this an area you were fairly familiar with? I guess I'm curious, like how much time you spend in your locations, like prior to shooting, and I guess also like, are you doing this alone, or are others accompanying you, even if your actors are with you?
No, in the beginning I was mainly alone, and I had at some point Maite and Nick on board who helped me building the sets and creating this whole world, and we just drive around and talk to people and look for abandoned farmhouses and places where we could shoot. But it was also pandemic times. So on one hand, we were not very lucky. We had to postpone the shoot several times. But then again, we were somehow lucky because many places were empty because nothing happened there. So we could rent them cheap.
Yeah. You mentioned you were thinking about this project for 10 years, but obviously you were making the film during the pandemic. How did that like affect your thinking about the film, since there is like this evident, crossover between what's kind of happening on screen and what's going on then?
Yeah, in fact, when I received the funding for the film and the pandemic hit, it was exactly the same moment. And I was very upset because suddenly the subject was so current, how do you say it? Like it was very relevant, and I didn't like it and I cut out certain things out of the whole thing with the chickens. It was much more evident in the initial script. So there's this village and they feed off chickens. They raise them for generations, and some things, if you raise it like generation after this, the quality is not great, and maybe there is some sort of sickness happening from these chickens and the eggs. But that's their life. That's what they've always done, and they feed on it. So, but it was suddenly, birds, viruses, people are getting sick, and I was like, no, please, I didn't want to. And also for your question with the locations, for me it was important to find this place that's a bit out of time. You don't really know when it is. Is it nowadays? Is it the past? Is it the future? Something like it's more of a mental space anyway, somehow. And in fact, it's quite real. We didn't have to do much in this world because it still exists. We have this super high technology nowadays where, we have these tiny robots going into our bodies in order to do some sort of surgery. But then we still have farmers who actually clean shit of animals with their hands. I mean, and this happens parallel. So, for me, it also was important to have this high-end technology, like this spaceship that's going out of our solar system, which is of course not possible nowadays, but then still have this very primitive world.
I guess I'm curious about that tension that kind of comes up throughout the film in different ways. This this tension between tradition and progress, solitude and companionship. I'm curious how you thought about sort of these themes and the subject matter in relation to just how you constructed the form of the film, the visual language, but also just how at many points what we're hearing is contrasted to what we're even seeing.
I find it difficult when writing to say all these important, great things and not being too, I don't know, it becomes often so, it's a bit, I don't know how to say it, what's the word, like tacky? Or no, it's a British word more, like tacky, cheesy, what do you say? If there are characters and talking on these things, so it was an idea to say all these things without really saying, so let someone else, like Aldous Huxley, say all these things.
Right, what we're hearing throughout is a speech by Aldous Huxley.
Exactly,
right?
So the dialogue that they have is more simple, more everyday, and maybe not so meaningful in the end.
How did you come across that speech?
Doing animation, actually, because
Yeah.
while I was animating, I didn't have time to read much because I was drawing all the time. So I was listening a lot to the radio and sometimes to things, I don't know, on YouTube. And then I came across these lectures. And they were done 1960 at MIT, I think. And there were like a series of 6 very interesting and inspiring lectures by Aldous Huxley. And I was so intrigued, I knew someday I need to use some of it somehow in some way.
So you were familiar with it long before you actually started
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the project?
In the beginning, it was not clear this is going to go into this film, no, but at some point when I was started writing, I didn't know which parts would go in, but I knew for sure there will be a radio, there will be this voice talking to them. And on the one hand, it's like there may be some conscious talking to them, also the outside world talking to them. And nowadays we are all on our devices. Of course, it's not like here, the simple radio, we have our phones and news, but it's also a means of radicalization. If you constantly listen to the same channel all the time, you kind of brainwash yourself. And for me, it was also, the way to show what is happening inside Margarita and her process of maybe thinking, and again, radicalizing herself in order to make certain decisions. So.
I'll just ask one more question, and then we can open it up. But I'm curious, like, what is your relationship to your material when you finish shooting? When you become the editor of your work, like, do you find yourself surprised, or are you working on a fairly like off a strict sort of vision of what you know what you want at that point?
It's a mixture. It's definitely a mixture. So as I said, the script was there. So it was clear what I was interested in, what was important to me. But also talking in terms of animation, as you asked before, I didn't really reply. I felt I wanted to also shoot with people because, again, there is more surprise possible. It's not so controlled, because when I draw, it's all controlled. So again, it's a mixture. So I tried to create the world, and then things happen there. The same in the editing. But I had like two, let's say, major rounds of editing. So the first one was me trying, of course, to construct what I wrote. And it was great, but it was too long. So, and I knew that might be a problem, and I didn't want the film to stand in its own way. And especially because it's my first fictional feature, and it's also difficult to present it somewhere with this length. So it has to be fantastic. If it's a 3-hour film, it has to be really good to be selected to be shown somewhere. So I decided to edit it, to make it shorter, and then I started viewing the material in a completely different way, because I knew I cannot just make the scenes shorter or take out an image here and there, because there was already a rhythm and there was a flow in the 3-hour version. So, and by that time, I discovered new things for sure. The way I treated the material, somehow I allowed the material to tell me what to do, instead of me trying to impose my ideas into the material. And so with this version, I know exactly why each of the images is there, because I've been squeezing the best out of it.
Okay, we have some time for audience questions. Please raise your hand, and a mic will come to you. We'll go with you first, sir, and then in the back.
Some of your last words were of great importance and wisdom. You said that it was too long. There are not many filmmakers that realize that what they do are too long. Even in place, it's very important. And I'd like to congratulate both of you for excellent questions and your ready answers. Bravo.
Thanks.
Thanks. There was a hand in the back, yes, in the red shirt.
Hi, that was really lovely. Thank you so much.
Hi.
I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the sort of radicalization of the two women, and I wondered if you could sort of speak to that element of the movie and that plot line, and maybe how that plays out against like Wolf's violence and things like that.
Excuse me, can you repeat the second part?
Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about the radicalization of the two women and sort of how that stands out against Wolf and Wolf's sort of like violence or implicit threats.
Right. Well, quite in the beginning, maybe you remember the scene where Wolf is in bed with Margarita in the evening, and he's talking about these fanatics, that they are now doing things and that they are acting and not reacting, and that there are these people of action and who are not passive, and he accuses Margarita of being passive, which it escapes him actually, that he's way more active than he thinks he is. And I don't know, maybe you have noticed throughout the film, we mostly see the person who's listening rather than the one who's speaking. So I think it's like, just because someone might not say something or reply doesn't mean there's action going on in the head. And in this case, it's also a story of Margarita in the end, figuring out what the actual problem is and what holds her back from being active and taking things into her own hands and take responsibility. And as we see, the first attempt fails because it's the traditional one. If you don't like something, just blow it up. Maybe it's not always the problem, because we know the revolutions, they happen, and of course they change things, they move, but they are never perfect, they're never fully completed. Revolutions usually stop, and violent revolutions, I don't know, these are the questions also for me. And there comes the radicalization, we're right now also in a world where everything's more polarized, radicalized, and I don't know how about here, but in Europe, suddenly everybody says, we've been so naive in the past, I don't know, decades, and reduced our expenses on arms and military equipment and everything, and we believed we can live in Europe without war. It's naive, and I think that's bullshit. It's not naive, it's progress. I mean, it was a good idea, it was a progressive idea, and it was a belief that actually we can manage, So.
I liked the last question that was asked before, especially about shortening the movie. You had plans to have 3 hours, and I was just curious if you could elaborate on that more, on what was gained and what was lost from that sort of process through editing. Was it something in narrative? Was it something in its tone or its pace? I think just a little elaboration.
You want the secret. When you present a film, you're not supposed to say that it was all supposed to be different and now it's this. But I will answer to that. I just want to say, I remembered, because the previous question was also towards Wolf, just one little addition. For me, Wolf, also in the end, when he screams, everything has to stay, this is also the kind of conservative energy past, that even though he pretends to be the active person, the force, still it's conservative. He's like the most conservative within this constellation. And my first rough edit was 6 hours, and I sat down and I was like, I'm doomed. I cried. And the next day I went for a very long walk, and then I came back and started cutting. And but from this 3-hour version where we almost did the final sound design actually already. But at some point, it was a hard moment, because I realized, no, it's not gonna work somehow, even though it worked for me and I liked it. But I decided to put away my own ego, and focus on what's the quality, just choose the best scenes. And in terms of narrative, yes, now it's a tiny bit more elliptic. So towards your question, in the beginning, it was quite elliptic in the script, but now it's even more elliptic. And there were, don't tell anyone, there were 4 main characters. So I edited out one character. We shot many, many scenes with him, and his name was Boy so it was Margarita Güte, which means something like goodness, wolf, and boy, so you can imagine his role. But
Is it a character we see in the film at any point?
yes, there's a scene in the bar. There's a moment he sits with them on the table. It's like quite young-looking guy in this yellow shirt. And I don't know if you remember, right in the beginning, I could not just totally mask him out. When Margarita approaches the window where Güte is looking the bodybuilding video, there's a person next to her. And this is Boy. So it was very sad. It was tough. And it's a good friend of mine. And he's been there from the beginning. He was one of the first people to read the script. He was one of the first to go on a trip to try to find locations. It was tough. So I owe him a lot as well, because he was also he was an important part of the shooting of the whole ambience. He entertained everybody, so he contributed actually also to the way the others acted, because they were not only acting in front of the camera. We spent 1 month all together. They were playing all the time with each other, and he was a big part of it. And he contributed to this very kind of familiarity on set with everybody. So, but don't tell anybody.
I hope he took it well. Yeah.
Well, he's an artist, so he understands, he respects the decisions, but of course he was not very happy.
Gotcha. I think we have time for just 1 or 2 more questions. Yep, right on the aisle here, and then we'll get you next.
Thank you so much. It's such a beautiful and interesting film. My question is more, I guess it's more about your writing process, because I feel like there's a lot of very conceptual ideas, and even the characters are set up as a symbol to a certain degree. So I'm curious, how did it come to you first? Like, you have the concepts, or you have the characters? And when does the narrative or like the relationship comes into play? And also how you balance the conceptual part with what feels like a real character and their dynamics?
Thank you. It's an interesting question, because I never know exactly how to put these elements together. So I don't have so far like a clear method. Each time, even for my short films, it happens differently. In this case, I definitely had the characters. And in the beginning, there was just Margarita and Wolf. And then a boy appeared, well, disappeared later. But then also, at some point, I was there and I realized, no, it's not enough to just have Margarita alone, because there's so much going on inside of her, and I need to be able to show it. I don't want her to say all of this. So she split into 2, and some of her characteristics and qualities went on to Güte. And actually, in the end, she's alone, and we see the tree from the perspective where the tree is just 1 trunk and not 2. So it's just my kind of personal thing. But so yes, so in the beginning, these were definitely the characters. And then when I start writing, I just try to visualize the world and visualize the characters, and suddenly they start doing things, and I write it down somehow. And the conceptual things, for example, the things with the still lifes or landscapes, this is something I knew I would do, but I did not really put it specifically in these moments in the script, but I had a list of images that I want to make, like in addition. I didn't know where to put them in the script, but I knew I'm going to shoot them.
I think we have time for one last question right here.
I'll be quick, thank you. A very complex film, it's still very complex. 2 questions. One was the reference to people being poisoned and the reference to burning people. That's where I said, where am I? Well, I said it a lot, but thank you for a gorgeous, very provocative film.
Thank you. Well, this might be, the gap that happens there. now I feel like I'm justifying this. I'm saying all these things I'm not supposed to say as a very confident director, right? Like the job of Wolf, he's working for the cremation facility in the village because they're burning their people. So this is what that happened. It's not like they're burning them to kill them, but they're taking care of the bodies. I don't know if this answers the question. But the poisoning is because there is obviously the source that makes people sick, and they don't take it away somehow. He's also contributing to the fact that people are still eating it, and then he's also taking care of the corpses. And some people actually maybe leave. They don't, not everybody dies. Some people go away. Because they can. It's not a closed space. There are planes flying all the time. So they can leave anytime if they want to.
Well, we won't reveal any more mysteries about the film because we're out of time. But Katharina, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for staying.